Welcome to Exploring the Bible. We're glad that you joined us tonight in person, or if you're on the live stream, welcome. And we have been studying together for a few weeks now. I think this is lesson 7 coming up. We've been studying how to handle abusers, bullies, and difficult people. As I said, this is lesson 7. And the title for lesson 7 is this: Moses, helping those who are bullied. Last week we looked at a different Bible character, but this week we're going to move on to Moses. And a very intriguing study if you look at it through the lens that we're going to look at it tonight. I want to start with a startling statistic. When bystanders to bullying intervene, bullying stops within 10 seconds 57% of the time. Now that comes off of stopbullying.gov, but they are quoting a study done in 2012 called a meta-analysis of school-based bullying prevention programs and some more with multiple authors. But so there's some research behind this. It's just not somebody's opinion. If somebody intervenes, bullying stops within 10 seconds 57% of the time. Now, I would love to see what happens in 20 seconds or 30 seconds, but we don't have that information. But I still think it's an amazing statistic. So let's keep that in mind, because of our topic tonight is how to help, how to intervene, how to step forward and assist somebody else that's being bullied. Let's just review a little bit. Last week we observed some important principles for resolving conflicts from David and Abigail's interaction in 1 Samuel chapter 25. This week, the account of Moses' early life in Exodus chapters 2 and 3 provides us with the necessary elements for helping those around us who are being bullied. So let's just look at it from an overview here, just try to fix some of these thoughts in our minds tonight. The setting is this: Moses has reached age 40, and he has rejected the treasures of Egypt and his royal status to help his people. He encounters some bullies. One is an Egyptian who was bullying a Hebrew. He's probably a taskmaster. He was beating the Hebrew, chapter 2, verse 11. And then he encounters a different situation, one of God's people, a Hebrew, an Israelite, however we refer to him, who was abusing a fellow countryman. And then finally, later on in chapter 2, Moses comes face to face with some shepherds who were bullying the daughters of Jethro. So there's the bullies, the victims, the 2 unnamed Israelites mentioned just a moment ago, and the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian. We know his name was Jethro, by the way, from a later account in the book of Exodus. The helper, the hero, however you want to describe him, the one who intervened on all 3 occasions was Moses. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the source of the conflict. Well, obviously, Moses encounters multiple bullies and abusers, and they are abusing innocent people. And after an initial failure on Moses' part to resolve the conflict as he should have in the situation that we come to first, he later learns from his mistake and successfully defends the weak. So, helping those who are bullied, chapter 7. We want to begin with our bully tools. We've been looking at some tools each week that we can use to handle bullies and abusers and so on. So we're going to go back to that again this week and give you only 2 more tools this week. And these tools are just a little bit different than what we've been looking at previously. But this is helping somebody else who's being bullied. It's not dealing with the situation, that is involving us otherwise. So it was appropriate that we have a new tool here, a handsaw. I like the handsaw. Thank you, Don. Uh, love the creativity. The first tool that we need to cover tonight then is compassion. Compassion. That comes from a Greek word that you find often in the Gospels that refers to a concern for somebody else. Uh, uh, I don't know how to say it. I don't want to say pity them, but it's to be compassionate and to be hurting with them and feeling with them uh, in relation to what's happening to them. And so I've labeled it compassion, and I think it'll become clear as we look at it. So, first tool, have compassion for victims. We're never going to be able to intervene and do any good if we don't see the situation, understand uh, the difficulty and the stress and the pain that the victim is going through, to the extent that we are willing to put ourselves on the line for them. We have to have compassion for victims. Now, you might say, well, how do we do that? How do we develop compassion? We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to cover this. Compassion requires purposeful action. Purposeful action. In other words, taking action is good. We have to have the right action. We have to be purposeful about it. And here's where Moses starts off with the first situation. And before I get into Exodus 2, I want to take you to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. We're here in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. All the Old Testament heroes of faith are discussed, and Moses is one of them. And in verse 24, the writer of Hebrews says, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, we mentioned earlier, was about 40 years old. Up until this time, he had been under the tutelage of the Egyptian regime of Pharaoh. He was taught in all the philosophies and the learning of Egypt. And he was a prince. He was of some note. He was somebody. We don't know if he would ever become Pharaoh, like the old movie that Charlton Heston was in. What was that called? What? The Ten Commandments, right. That's not stated, but he wasn't just anybody off the street. So Moses, by faith, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God and to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. How in the world did Moses, coming out of all of the influence over him by the Egyptians for the last 30 plus years, how did he get to this? I think it's because he had those first formative years at home with his mother. It could have been 3 or 4 years. Some guess it could have been up to 12 years before he was actually turned over to the princess. And he went into the court life and so forth. I think that early training at home is key, and it never left Moses. Now let's go to chapter 2 of the book of Exodus. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren. Look at that. He went out to his brethren. It was a purposeful action. He had made a decision to leave all that Egypt offered him behind and to move out and do what needed to be done for his people. So in some way or fashion, at this point, Moses envisioned himself or felt called in some way to be a deliverer for his people. And that was what was on his mind, no doubt. But he didn't handle the situation very good. But anyway, we'll come to that. It came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. I think I may have skipped one here. He went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. I just should have highlighted that extra part there. So I guess I did in this screen. He went out to his brethren and he looked on their problems, their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Again, probably a taskmaster. They were treated as slaves and put to forced labor, and that had all changed because Joseph has long since passed off the scene. So let's move to point B under number 1. Compassion is a biblical obligation. Before we talk about how do we develop it in earnest, we have to understand we are obligated to have compassion on the weak. We're going to look at 2 New Testament passages very quickly. The first one is in Luke chapter 7. Jesus raised the widow of Nain's son from the dead. And now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him and a large crowd. And he came near the gate of the city. Behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, Moses looked on his brethren. He saw their plight. Jesus looks on this situation, and he had compassion on this woman. She had an extra crucial, powerful loss here. She lost her son, but she was a widow. She had no one left. It was certainly something that was due the compassion of the Lord. And he said unto her, "Do not weep." Now, if that's the extent of our compassion, we don't have compassion. Ever have somebody tell you, "Oh, don't cry. Everything's going to be all right. Don't worry about it." That's not very much of a comfort that you're offering. Jesus saw, he had compassion, he said, "Do not weep," but then he did something. He came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And he who was dead sat up and began to speak. And he presented him to his mother, to the woman that he had compassion for. But he had to see and understand the situation and respond to it. Let's move on to another very familiar passage, and this is in Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. Now this begins in verse 25 when a lawyer stood up and tested the Lord and asked him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, what's written in the law?" Like, okay, now the lawyer's on the spot, so he says, "Well, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus here, and he said to him, "You have answered rightly. This do, and you will live." Now, at first glance, you might say, was Jesus teaching works-based salvation? No, because nobody can do that. Nobody can love the Lord with all their heart, all the soul, all their mind, and the strength, and their breath. And we do well to get some of our neighbors, okay? He's trying to make a point to this man. And the man kind of gets it, because he says this in verse 28, or verse 29, but he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbor?" Because he knew he didn't love his neighbors. He didn't love all of them. So he just condemned himself, as the law does. The law always condemns us. That's why we need the grace of Christ. And Jesus then tells him the story of the Good Samaritan. It may have actually happened. It's called a parable. I just rather use the word story because I realize this could well have happened. We don't know. Oops, let's go back to that. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. Okay, I didn't finish where I was at. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and it begins this way. There's a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and when you go from Jerusalem to Jericho, you go down because you're going from the mountaintop to the valley, the lowest place on earth around the Dead Sea. And he's assaulted, he's wounded, he's robbed, he's left for dead. And then along comes a priest who came down the road, probably going the same direction, since it said he's going down. So he had finished his priestly duties on his shift. He's probably going home. And he sees the man, and he just passes on by. He's more interested in getting home than helping the man. Maybe he figures, what's the use? He's going to die. Maybe he had some sort of priestly concern about touching somebody who might be dead. Who knows? But he passed by. Then Jesus said a Levite came along. Doesn't say he's going down. He's going the other way. He's going up the road probably. And he's going to serve in the temple. The man who just finished his service in the temple passes him by. Now the Levite who's going to serve the Lord in the temple passes him by. And neither of them treated the man as a neighbor. And then along comes this Samaritan in verse 33. But a certain Samaritan as he journeyed. Now look, the Samaritans were hated. They were the descendants of the 10 northern tribes who had intermarried, not only by choice, but kind of forced upon them by the Assyrians. And so they weren't fully Jewish. They were part Gentile. And the Jews hated them. So along comes this Samaritan. Now, the point is, obviously, and we understand, the Samaritan was the one who was a neighbor to the man. But look what it says in verse 33. And when he saw him, he had compassion. What brought about the compassion? He looked on his situation. He was empathetic with his plight. He felt his pain. When we take the time to do that, then, especially if we know the Lord and the Spirit's operative in our life, passion should automatically flow from that. So he went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured on oil, put him on his own animal, brought him to the inn, took care of him, and then when he left, he paid the innkeeper to take care of him. Now, this man had been assaulted. I suppose we could describe those who did this as bullies, but they're probably just common criminals. But the point is, the Good Samaritan assisted, he helped, he intervened in the situation. And this was after somebody had been hurt, after somebody had suffered. Many times when we're comforting people or trying to help people who are suffering from bullying, we come in after the fact. So, and when we do things like this, it's costly to us. Time, effort, money, but that's a part of it. And we're going to see some of that as we get further into the story here a little bit later. And then in the end, Jesus says to the man, "What think you? What do you think who was the neighbor? So which of these do you think was the neighbor to him that fell among the thieves?" He's asking this lawyer. And the lawyer said, "He who showed mercy on him." The lawyer doesn't say Samaritan. He won't even say that word. He who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise," because he wasn't doing that. But it's interesting to me, Jesus saw and had compassion and took appropriate action. And so we need to have compassion for those who are being bullied or abused. And becoming compassionate requires purposeful action. We cannot look the other way. We have to look at the victim from the viewpoint of one who is weak and unable to stand up to the bully or abuser, observing their pain and inability to deal with them, motivating us to act on their behalf. Be like the Good Samaritan. Years ago, I was in I was in grade school, maybe 5th, 6th grade. And I was always getting into scrapes with other boys in the neighborhood. And there was this one boy lived down the street. He was a year or two older than me, head and shoulders above me, outweighed me probably 75 to 100 pounds. And we got into, I don't remember about what. And I don't know how we ended up probably 400 or 500 yards from home, down over a hill and across the paved road and in a field back of a little service station that my grandfather ran. And I don't remember how I was put on the ground, but I remember I was flat on my face on the ground and this guy was sitting on my back with his knees on my shoulder blades, and I couldn't move. And I was just panicked. And I couldn't get up. I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't know what he was going to do to me. When I heard a strong voice shout, and I looked up, it was my grandfather coming toward us. And when he shouted, "What are you going?" The guy on my back jumped up, ran across the paved road, and back up the hill. And I was so mad I chased him. I don't know why I did that. He was running, but he wasn't running from me. He was running from my grandfather. But I often thought years later, my Well, my grandfather never was out back of his station. There's no reason to be out there. There was an old warehouse there, and we were beyond that. How did he know? How he had his eye on me? Probably when we came down there, probably whatever was going on between us, saw what was happening, and he intervened when he saw my plight. Now, I'm telling you, if you've ever been in a similar situation, and probably not, but life can feel that way. And when someone steps in, it's such a blessing. So let's move on to our next anti-bully tool. Have compassion on those that are suffering. And then number 2, defend the weak. Defend the weak. So, what's required to help those who are bullied? Have compassion for victims. Defend the weak. How do we do that? Well, there's a right way and a wrong way. We're given 2 examples here in Exodus. And the first way that Moses responded to defending this Israelite who was being abused by the Egyptian was the wrong course. The wrong way included unjustified violence. Unjustified violence. So let's look at it in the text here. This is speaking of Moses. So he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now notice, he will make sure nobody saw him do this. He kills the Egyptian. Now, I have no doubt that Moses was extremely angry and indignant and wanted to defend the man who was being abused, but he went too far. And Moses always, throughout his life, had a problem with anger and not controlling it. And if you know the book of Exodus and the story, you know some of that. It was something he always struggled with. Every one of us have those things we struggle with, sometimes for a lifetime. And we have to learn to grow and control it and do better. And Moses did. But anyway, verse 13, he went out the second day, and behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Then he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Now, he looked this way and that way before he killed the Egyptian. There was no witnesses, except it had to have been the Hebrew that the Egyptian was bullying, and Moses probably figured he's not going to tell anybody. But word got out. So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now, in some cases, the physical approach may well be the only option. Let me give you an example. This happened back in September of 2015, so it's been a few years. Happened out in California at Huntington Beach High School. A California teenager came upon a bully who was beating a blind student. Now, I don't know about you, maybe you've heard this, but when I was a kid growing up in my neighborhood, and my grandmother lived out back, and she knew a lot of stuff, and she would threaten me. She said, I don't want to ever hear of you ever hitting anybody that's wearing glasses. Well, back in those days, I suppose glasses would break and shatter, and it was very dangerous. I remember getting that lecture. But can you imagine someone beating a blind person? That's just about as low as you can get. And he was hitting this boy multiple times in the head, the face, and so on. The whole thing was filmed by another student. Now, I don't know why, but that film was on Facebook for a while before we had thousands and thousands of people watched it. Maybe they were trying to get evidence, I don't know. But it didn't stop it. He repeatedly hit the blind boy, the bully did, around the head. It was during lunch when the other boy, the hero, rushed up. He was bigger than the bully, stronger than the bully. He hit the bully one time and dropped him. He was laying there bleeding on the floor. And he quickly went to check on the blind boy, see if he was all right, and then he returned to berate the bully, and he didn't use the best of language. He probably wasn't a believer, but it's an example. The bully was arrested on suspicion of misdemeanor battery, but released to his parents. So he didn't get much of a punishment otherwise. But I don't know, is there other ways? Maybe he could have just grabbed the boy, restrained him rather than hit him. He just reacted like Moses did. That's not the best approach, although there may be situations where it's the only solution. The wrong way, unjustified violence. The right way, confrontation. Confrontation. Verse 13. We're going to go back over this. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? Moses didn't hit him. Moses didn't take out a sword. Moses didn't kill him. He confronts him verbally. Has Moses learned from yesterday's mistake? I think he's starting to learn. I mean, he probably felt convicted about that whole thing from the day before. But he did a bad thing, totally out of control. It doesn't repeat itself, although the man says, oh, are you going to kill me like you killed the guy yesterday? So he didn't. He said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? He confronted him. Moving on to verses 16 and 17. I think I got something in the wrong place here. No, I didn't. I just thought I had some information here. Anyway, after that happened, the man said, who made you prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me? That's when Moses knew that what he had done the previous day was known, and he fled, and that's where we go next. Sorry, it kind of threw me here. I was looking for something else, but it'll come up in a minute. Now, the last thing we saw there at the end, remember, he went and he fled to the land of Midian and sat down by a well. If you're fleeing from Egypt and you're going into the land of Midian, which is west of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is north of the Red Sea, you go straight into the desert. So the well's where you want to be. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, verse 16, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Now, again, I don't know what Moses did, but it wasn't violence. Violence probably wouldn't have worked anyway. I mean, he was outnumbered. I don't know what he did, but he presented something in terms of standing up for those ladies who were doing a job that, sons should have done, but evidently there were no sons. Moses was 40 plus years old, a grown man. We don't know how old these shepherds were. They might have been younger. They might have been totally intimidated. We don't know what he said to them. We don't even know if he pushed them back or had to restrain them, or we don't know what he did. But he stood up and helped them. Then the daughters go home and tell their father, Reuel is his name here, he's called Jethro in Exodus 18. He said, how is it that you have come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. And he also drew enough water for us to water our flock. Moses is learning. It's interesting that he has the wrong reaction when he kills the Egyptian, and then he does a little better when he confronts the Hebrew bully, but he still hadn't really, progressed far enough that God doesn't the first time, the first day, the first moment he lands in Midian, he's faced with more bullies. God has a way of just giving us challenges that we have to overcome. We have to learn, and Moses is learning. And there's a reason for that, the reason that God is doing this. But for whatever Moses did here, we don't know. But here's a story that's a little different than the young man hitting the bully. Um, this goes back a few years, abcnews.com. A man by the name of Aubrey Fontenot learned that his son was being bullied at school. And he was upset, he was angry, he went and talked to the principal, he went and talked to the cop, as he calls him, the school officer, but it didn't stop. It continued. He told his son, and he gave his son some good advice, but it didn't work. He said, I urged him to talk about it and even befriend the guy, but it didn't work. Finally, Aubrey went to school a second time, and this time he found out from the school principal that the bully was homeless. Changed his whole attitude toward the bully. I'm having a little trouble with the new setup here, but I'm learning, like Moses. So what happened? Well, the bully got suspended because of the most recent situation with Aubrey's son, Jordan. And it had to do with the bully stealing his cell phone, which was they never recovered. And so the school suspended the bully. But Aubrey Fontenot somehow talked to the bully's mother, got permission to take him shopping at the mall and buying some clothes, and set him down and talked to him about proper behavior. He befriended the bully, and I'm going to find the rest of my notes here somewhere. I know it's on this thing. There we go. Sorry about that. I wanted to get these words right. He said, I took him shopping and bought him some clothes. I talked to him about morals and principles and having self-respect. He wasn't much of a talker, but I got him to open up. That's good. Now, the next thing he did is he set up a time for him and the bully and his son to talk. And in the course of that conversation, in his own words, he said this to the two boys. He said, from here, this is nothing. What's happened, we're beyond that. This is nothing. Shake hands, and from now on, you are brothers and you protect each other. I don't know how it ended up in the long run, but a few weeks elapsed, and Jordan, the father, said, they're brothers. So I hope that continued. Now, there's always ways beyond violence if we put the effort into it, if we have enough compassion to get involved, like the Good Samaritan did. That was after the fact. But here's somebody in the midst of it. And it goes back to what we learned last week when we saw Abigail doing good things, when David was bullying or acting like a bully. So let's move on to B in the outline under the second point. Second point is defend the weak. Then B is no excuses are sufficient. No excuses are sufficient. Now here we're going to go to Exodus 3, 9 to 10. This is after, and shortly after, I mean, there was some time lapse, obviously, but we don't know how much. But the next thing in the text that we find in Exodus in chapter 3 is the story of the burning bush. And Moses turns aside, God speaks to him out of the burning bush. And verse 9, the Lord says, now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Why Moses? Because he'd already trained him. He'd already called him. Moses had to go now and deliver an entire nation from affliction. He's learned lessons along the way. He's been in that school for 40 years. He also was a shepherd, which was a great training ground for leadership. I will send you to Pharaoh, he says, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now, we know the rest of the story, and I'm not going to go into it. He starts making excuses. I can't talk very well. Uh, they won't believe me. Who will I say sent me? There's a whole string of excuses Moses made to God, and God just shot them all down and sent him. So when we have that obligation, and when we can do something, we need to do it. That's what God expects from us. And who knows, maybe we're a little bit like, in situations that occur like this, maybe we'd be a little bit like Esther. Or, this is time that God has appointed for me to do something. Let's look at a couple cross references before we finish. Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. It's pretty pointed, right? I don't know about you. I asked the question this week when I sent out the email. Have you ever intervened for somebody who's being bullied? What was the result? And I also asked the question, has anybody ever intervened when you were being bullied? What was the result? Maybe we'll have some time to discuss that. But I thought about some situations in my own life. And I can tell you this, I haven't always intervened like I should. And I have failed to intervene in the right way. And I failed to intervene at all at times. And I think we're all fall into those categories. I remember once in the midst of basketball practice, I was in 7th, 8th grade basketball. We had some older kids there that created a situation, and they were picking on a kid, and I tried to stand up for him, and instead I got the abuse. It wasn't anything serious, but when you intervene, you take a chance. The bully's going to turn on you, so that's a chance you take. But remember the statistic. We have that opportunity, perhaps 57% of the time. Just standing up is going to change it just like that. So, I've tried to intervene, and it didn't turn out that well. I've failed to intervene. I remember a kid in like 4th grade. He was in 5th grade. We were in the bus line, and the 6th grader or older kid was picking on him every night. And he would just push the kid till they were ready to fight, and then the kid was smaller than him, and then he would back off. And it was miserable to be in the bus line. And for years I thought I should have done something. I should have, maybe the two of us could have ended that, but I didn't. Another time in high school, I had a cousin who was being bullied, and I didn't do anything about it because it didn't seem that serious to me. But now as I look back on it, it was probably very serious to him. And so these are things, if you don't do like you should, they can dwell on your mind for a long time, and probably rightfully so. It's important to learn how to stand up for somebody else and not just for yourself. One final verse, 1 Thessalonians, 2 verses, 1 Thessalonians 5, 14 to 15. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. And for all. That's probably one of the toughest things to get down. How do we do it? Should we do it? When do we do it? But whatever you do, it's probably better than nothing, unless you're, like Moses, and that's going a little too far. All right. Well, we're glad that you were here, and this has been a fascinating study for me. By the way, I got something else here for you somewhere. Oh, it's still here, honey. I'm going to learn this system, and I'm going to be better. At least I'm not looking around at the screen all the time. Here it is. We are responsible for standing up for those who are bullied or abused. We must take steps to defend and deliver them from their tormentors. Now, I provided you with a second handout tonight, which is from a website called Girls Guide to End Bullying.org. And there's a chart here that I think is very instructional, very helpful. The first part is some ways bystanders support bullying. That's what you shouldn't do. Don't support the bully by laughing, pointing, or passing a rumor. Second point, when bystanders do nothing to stop the bullying, what does the bully think? They think you agree with their actions. What does the victim think? They feel the same way as the bully. What do bystanders think? Well, they think if you're not standing up to the bully, I'm not going to either. And then the third point, why don't bystanders intervene? Why do sometimes people not intervene? They're scared or worried about becoming the next target, or they think everyone else agrees with the bully. They don't know what to do to help the victim, and they don't realize what they're observing is bullying. They don't have that compassion. Just a helpful chart, and that's a good website if you want to go there and look it up. They got lots of great information. Don't know how long it's going to be online. We took a long time to get permission to use some of their stuff, and the people who have the website seem to be not keeping it up, so don't know if it's going to be on there long, but it's a great place. Thank you for being here, and we'll say goodbye to our live stream listeners. Thank you for being with us tonight. And next week, we will take another step. Just 2 weeks left, and we'll be done with this subject.